7:47 p.m. That's when Maya Sterling's perfectly ordered world shattered into 1,000 pieces she would never put back together the same way again. 7:47 p.m. on a Thursday evening, when everyone else had gone home, when the hallways of Vanguard Group's executive floor were empty and silent, when Director Harrison Thorne locked the door to his corner office and told Maya that her dedication to the company was about to be rewarded. 7:47 p.m., when the man she'd fetched coffee for, scheduled meetings for, made excuses for to his wife, decided that her 2 years of flawless service had earned her the privilege of his attention, his hands, his body pressed against hers while she couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but feel her glasses slip crooked on her face as he whispered about knowing her place. But what Harrison Thorne didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that on the other side of that heavy oak door, a man was listening. Welcome to the Silk and Steel Diary, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Not just any man, Ji-Hoon Kang, heir to the Kang crime family, shadow investor, the dragon who'd been watching the silent woman with the careful hands and kind eyes for 6 months, wondering why someone so brilliant made herself so small. And in the span of 3 minutes and 42 seconds, as he stood outside that door, hearing fabric tear and Maya's breathing go shallow and desperate, Ji-Hoon Kang made a decision that would burn Vanguard Group to its corporate foundations. Some women get rescued by heroes. Maya Sterling got claimed by a monster who decided that anyone who touched what was his would learn the true meaning of scorched earth. Before we dive into how one attempted assault triggered the most brutal corporate war Manhattan has ever seen, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because this story is about power, silence, and what happens when the wrong man learns that the quiet woman he ignored was under the protection of someone who speaks only in violence. The Vanguard Group occupied floors 34 through 47 of the Chrysler Building's neighboring twin, a monument to old money, older power, and the kind of corporate prestige that came with mahogany desks and original Rothkos in the conference rooms. From the outside, it was investment banking royalty, wealth management for families whose names were on museum wings, mergers and acquisitions that shaped industries. But anyone who looked at the books, really looked, would see the shadow money, the capital injections that came through shell corporations registered in Seoul, the silent partner who never attended board meetings but whose word could sink or save the entire operation. Ji-Hoon Kang wasn't listed on any paperwork. His name appeared nowhere in Vanguard's corporate structure, but he owned 43% of the firm through a network of holdings so complex it would take federal investigators 5 years to unravel. He was 31 years old, Korean, 6'3", with the kind of face that made people look twice, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that could go from empty to lethal in a heartbeat, and hands marked with scars that didn't come from boardrooms. He wore Tom Ford suits that cost more than most people's cars and moved through the world like a blade through silk. Polite, controlled, absolutely terrifying to anyone who understood what the family name Kang meant in certain circles. He'd been in New York for 8 months, overseeing the family's expansion into legitimate business, learning the language of corporate warfare, while never forgetting the more direct methods that had built his empire. And in those 8 months, he'd noticed exactly one person at Vanguard Group, Maya Sterling. 26 years old, Black American, 5'6" with deep brown skin, natural hair she wore in an elegant low bun, and dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that seemed to see everything while demanding nothing. She was Director Harrison Thorne's executive assistant, the woman who arrived first, left last, anticipated needs before they were spoken, and moved through the office like smoke, invisible until you really looked. Ji-Hoon had looked. He'd watched her deflect Thorne's inappropriate comments with professional grace, watched her work through lunch while others socialized, watched her fix problems that would have tanked deals, never taking credit, never asking for recognition. She reminded him of the old Korean saying, "The nail that sticks up gets hammered down." Maya Sterling had made herself flat, smooth, untouchable, the perfect employee, the woman no one would defend because she'd never asked for defense. For 6 months, he'd been trying to figure out how to approach her without frightening her, how to tell her that he saw her brilliance, her strength, the way she'd turned survival into an art form. But on this Thursday evening at 7:47 p.m., he didn't need to figure it out anymore, because as he walked down the executive corridor toward Thorne's office to drop off documents his assistant had forgotten, he heard it, the sound of a lock clicking from the inside. A woman's sharp intake of breath. Thorne's voice, smooth and practiced. "You've been working so hard, Maya. I think it's time we discussed your career development." Ji-Hoon Kang stopped walking. His hand, still holding the envelope, went completely still. His expression didn't change. To anyone watching, he would have looked like a man simply pausing in a hallway. But inside, something ancient and brutal woke up. He moved to the door, pressed his ear against the wood, heard fabric tear, heard Maya's breathing go ragged, heard Thorne's belt buckle, and made 3 phone calls. The first was to his head of security. "Lock down the building. No one leaves floor 42, especially not Harrison Thorne." The second was to his family's lawyer. "I need every piece of dirt on Harrison Thorne. Everything. I want his financial records, his communications, every woman he's touched, every secret he's buried. You have 2 hours." The third was to his cousin Min Jun, the family's enforcer. "Come to Vanguard, bring the cleaning crew. We're going to war." Then Ji-Hoon Kang unlocked the door from the outside because of course he had master access to every room in a building he owned 43% of, and stepped into Harrison Thorne's corner office. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. Maya bent over Thorne's desk, glasses hanging from one ear, blouse torn, eyes wide with shock and fury, and something worse, resignation, like this was something she'd been expecting, like she'd already calculated the cost of fighting back and decided her job wasn't worth it. And Thorne, standing behind her, belts undone, face flushed, looking at Maya like she was property he'd finally decided to claim. When the door opened, Thorne's head snapped up. Annoyance first, then recognition, then finally, the pale, sweating terror of a man who just realized he'd made a fatal mistake. "Mr. Kang," his voice cracked. We were just..." Ji-Hoon didn't speak. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed Thorne by the throat, and slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack the drywall. Maya collapsed against the desk, gasping, pulling her torn blouse closed with shaking hands, and Ji-Hoon Kang looked into Harrison Thorne's terrified eyes and smiled. It was the kind of smile that explained exactly why the Kang family had ruled Korea's underworld for 3 generations. "You touched something that belongs under my protection," Ji-Hoon said quietly, in perfect, unaccented English. "Do you understand what that means?" Thorne couldn't answer, could barely breathe against the hand crushing his windpipe. "It means you're already dead. The only question is how much you suffer first, and how many people I bury with you." He released Thorne, letting him collapse to the floor, gasping. Then he turned to Maya. His expression shifted completely, the violence draining away, replaced with something careful and concerned. He removed his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was still warm from his body, smelled like expensive cologne, and something darker underneath. "Miss Sterling," he said gently, crouching to her eye level, "you're safe now. I promise you, you're safe." Maya stared at him, at the man she'd seen exactly 4 times in 2 years, always from a distance, always surrounded by people who moved like weapons. Her glasses were still crooked. She reached up with a trembling hand to fix them, the same gesture she'd made 1,000 times, the automatic response to restore order. Ji-Hoon caught her hand, gently, carefully. "You don't need to fix anything," he said. "Not anymore, not for anyone." And Maya Sterling, who had spent 26 years learning how to be small, how to be silent, how to survive by making herself invisible, looked into the dark eyes of the most dangerous man in Manhattan and made a choice. She didn't pull her hand away. Behind them, Harrison Thorne was still on the floor, watching his entire world end. He just didn't know it yet. What Harrison Thorne didn't understand, what the entire executive team at Vanguard Group would learn in the coming weeks, was that Ji-Hoon Kang didn't do anything halfway. When he decided to go to war, he burned the earth so thoroughly that nothing would ever grow there again. And when he decided to protect someone, heaven help anyone who stood in his way. Maya Sterling had been 24 years old when she walked into Vanguard Group for her first interview, wearing a navy suit from TJ Maxx and carrying a portfolio that represented 4 years of strategic management coursework, 2 internships, and a 3.9 GPA from Howard University. She'd researched every executive, memorized the company's portfolio, prepared answers to questions they hadn't even asked yet. The HR director had looked at her resume for exactly 47 seconds before saying, "We have an opening for executive assistant position. The pay is excellent, and it's a wonderful way to learn the business." Maya had graduated summa cum laude with a degree in finance and business strategy. She'd applied for an analyst position, but she'd also looked at her student loan balance, her mother's medical bills, and the one-bedroom apartment in Queens she shared with 2 roommates, and she'd said yes. Just for a year, she told herself, just until I prove myself. That was 2 years ago. Harrison Thorne had been her direct supervisor from day one, 47 years old, Princeton-educated, third-generation Vanguard executive with a corner office and a reputation for developing talent. He was handsome in that polished, silver fox way that made clients trust him with their retirement funds, married to a former model, 2 kids in private school, the kind of man who donated to women's professional organizations and spoke at diversity conferences, the kind of man who knew exactly how to hide what he was. For the first 6 months, he'd been the perfect mentor, professional, encouraging. He'd praised her work, given her opportunities to sit in on high-level meetings, promised that if she paid her dues, he'd personally recommend her for an analyst position when one opened up. Maya believed him, had worked 70-hour weeks, had turned data analysis into an art form, had made herself indispensable. When Thorne's presentations won client accounts, it was because Maya had spent nights building the financial models. When deals closed smoothly, it was because Maya had anticipated every complication and solved them before they became problems. She was brilliant. Everyone knew it. No one cared. The comments started small. "You look nice today, Maya," a hand on her shoulder that lingered too long during a meeting. "Let's discuss this over dinner," invitations she'd learned to deflect with prior commitments that may or may not have existed. Then came the text messages, late night. "Still working? You're so dedicated." Then, "I appreciate you more than you know." Then, "My wife doesn't understand the pressure of this job. It's nice to have someone who gets it." Maya had stopped responding to anything that wasn't work-related, had started documenting everything, had kept her office door open whenever Thorne was nearby. But predators don't need closed doors to hunt. They just need power and patience. 8 months ago, Thorne had started touching her lower back when walking past, guiding her through doorways with his hand on her hip, standing too close when reviewing documents, his breath on her neck, his cologne suffocating. When she'd stepped away, he'd smiled. "Sorry, didn't mean to crowd you. You're just so easy to work with, I forget about personal space." 6 months ago, he'd called her into his office after hours to discuss her career trajectory, had poured 2 glasses of scotch despite her saying she didn't drink, had told her that the analyst position she wanted required someone who was a team player and willing to go the extra mile. "I see real potential in you, Maya," he'd said, moving around his desk to sit on the edge, too close to where she stood. But potential needs the right cultivation. She'd left that meeting with her stomach churny and her carefully maintained professionalism cracking at the edges. 3 months ago, another assistant, Rachel, a white woman, blonde, just as qualified as Maya, had quit abruptly, no notice, just cleaned out her desk on a Tuesday morning and disappeared. Maya had found her on LinkedIn and sent a message. "Are you okay?" Rachel's response had been a single sentence: "Don't let him corner you alone." Maya had started parking closer to the entrance, had made sure someone else was always in the office when she worked late, had perfected the art of being essential without being available. But tonight, Thorne had learned her schedule, had known she'd be working late to finish the quarterly report, had waited until the floor was empty and security had gone to check the lower levels, had locked the door and decided that 2 years of patience had earned him the right to take what he wanted. What he hadn't counted on was the man on the other side of that door, the one who'd been watching Maya for 6 months with the same patience Thorne had used for predation, but with entirely different intentions, the one who didn't ask permission to burn down empires. The sound of the lock disengaging from the outside was so quiet that Thorne almost didn't hear it over Maya's ragged breathing and his own blood pounding in his ears. Almost. But something in that soft mechanical click made his hands freeze on Maya's hips, made his brain catch up to his body, made him look toward the door with the first prickling of unease. The door opened slowly, deliberately, like whoever was on the other side wanted Thorne to have time to understand what was about to happen. Ji-Hoon Kang stepped into the office, and the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. He didn't rush, didn't shout, didn't even look particularly angry. He simply stood in the doorway in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his dark eyes taking in the scene with the methodical precision of a surgeon examining a tumor he was about to remove. Maya first, her torn blouse, her crooked glasses, the way she was pressed against the desk like a trapped animal. Then Thorne, belt undone, face fleshed, hands still on her. For 3 seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. Then Ji-Hoon closed the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a coffin sealing shut. "Mr. Kang," Thorne's voice came out strangled, already defensive. "Miss Sterling and I were just finishing the quarterly report. That's what you were doing, Director Thorne, with your belt undone and your assistant unable to breathe?" Thorne released Maya so fast she stumbled against the desk. He was already tucking in his shirt, his fingers fumbling with his belt buckle, his brain scrambling for the corporate doublespeak that had protected him for 20 years. "There's been a misunderstanding. Maya has been working very hard, and I was simply rewarding her dedication." Ji-Hoon took a step forward, just one, but something about the way he moved made Thorne take 2 steps back. "Is that the story you're going with?" "Now, Mr. Kang, I don't appreciate the implication." "I don't care what you appreciate." Ji-Hoon's voice didn't rise, didn't need to. "Do you know who I am, Director Thorne? I mean really know who I am." Thorne swallowed hard. His face had gone from flushed to pale, sweat beading on his upper lip. You're one of our investors. The Kang family holds significant..." "The Kang family owns 43% of this firm through 17 shell corporations registered in Seoul, Hong Kong, and the Cayman Islands." Ji-Hoon moved closer, each step measured and calm. "We hold the majority stake in your pension fund. We control the board votes that keep your uncle employed. And we have detailed financial records of every transaction you've ever made, including the settlement payments to 3 former employees who signed NDAs after you did to them exactly what you just tried to do to Miss Sterling." The color drained from Thorne's face completely. Those were misunderstandings. Those women were compensated fairly for their silence." The word cracked like a whip, despite Ji-Hoon's quiet tone. "You're already dead, Thorne. You died the moment you touched her. The only question now is whether you die cleanly or whether I make an example of you." Thorne's hands were shaking now, his corporate confidence evaporating like morning fog. "You can't threaten me. I'll call security. I'll call the police. Ji-Hoon smiled. It was the kind of smile that made grown men in Seoul sign over their businesses and thank him for the mercy. "Call anyone you want. Security works for me. The police commissioner's daughter goes to private school on a scholarship funded by my family's foundation, and your board of directors will have your resignation and a press release about your pursuit of other opportunities drafted by morning." He was close enough now that Thorne could smell his cologne, see the absolute absence of mercy in his dark eyes. But that's just business, Ji-Hoon continued softly. What happens to you personally, that depends on Miss Sterling. For the first time since entering the room, he turned his attention fully to Maya. She was still pressed against the desk, her torn blouse clutched close with white-knuckled hands, her breathing shallow, but her eyes were clear and furious behind those crooked glasses. Ji-Hoon removed his suit jacket with slow, careful movements, like he was approaching a wounded animal that might bolt. He held it out to her, his expression shifting from lethal to something impossibly gentle. "Miss Sterling," he said quietly, "you're safe now. I promise you, you're safe." Maya stared at him, at the jacket, at the man who just dismantled her boss's entire world under 3 minutes with nothing but quiet words and the weight of power she hadn't known existed. Her hands were still shaking as she reached for the jacket, still shaking as she pulled it around her shoulders, still shaking as she finally looked Harrison Thorne in the eyes without fear. "I want him destroyed," she said. Her voice was rough, broken, but absolutely certain. "Everything he's built, everyone who protected him, I want it burned to the ground." Ji-Hoon's smile shifted into something warm, almost proud. "Consider it done." The car that waited for them in Vanguard's private garage wasn't what Maya expected. Not a limousine or a flashy sports car, but a black Audi sedan with windows tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian. The driver, a Korean man in his 30s with the build of someone who'd spent years doing more than just driving, opened the door without a word. Ji-Hoon guided Maya into the back seat with a hand that never quite touched her, but hovered close enough to catch her if she fell. She was still wearing his jacket, still clutching her torn blouse underneath, still shaking despite the adrenaline crash that had left her feeling hollowed out and numb. "Where are we going?" Her voice sounded small in the leather-scented interior. "Somewhere safe." Ji-Hoon slid in beside her, maintaining careful distance. "Somewhere Thorne and his lawyers and the board of directors can't reach you while we dismantle everything he's ever built." Maya should have been afraid, should have questioned getting into a car with a man who'd just threatened to destroy someone's life with the casual efficiency of ordering coffee. But fear required energy she didn't have, and some animal part of her brain recognized that Ji-Hoon Kang was the most dangerous thing in her vicinity, which meant everything else was safer by comparison. The drive took 40 minutes, leaving Manhattan behind for the manicured wealth of the Connecticut coast. When they finally stopped, it was in front of a sprawling estate that looked like it had been transplanted directly from a Korean historical drama. Traditional architecture blended seamlessly with modern security, surrounded by walls that were beautiful and impenetrable in equal measure. The man who met them at the entrance was shorter than Ji-Hoon, but carried himself with the same predatory stillness. He had a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his jawline, and eyes that assessed Maya like she was a tactical problem to be solved. "Hyung," he greeted Ji-Hoon in Korean, then switched smoothly to English. "This is her?" "Min-jun, this is Maya Sterling." Ji-Hoon's hand finally touched her shoulder, gentle and grounding. "Maya, this is my cousin. He's going to make sure you're protected while we handle Thorne." Min-jun's expression softened fractionally. "Miss Sterling, welcome to the family estate." The way he said family made it clear he didn't mean the kind that gathered for Thanksgiving dinner. Inside, the house was a study in contrasts, minimalist Korean aesthetics, clean lines, natural wood, carefully curated empty space, but with the subtle modifications that spoke of serious security. Cameras hidden in light fixtures, reinforced doors disguised as decorative panels, men in expensive suits who were definitely not housekeepers stationed at strategic intervals. A woman in her 50s appeared from a side hallway, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in an elegant bun, her expression warm but assessing. "Ajuma Kim," Ji-Hoon said. "She manages the household. She'll help you get settled." Ajuma Kim's eyes went immediately to Maya's torn blouse, to the bruises already forming on her wrists where Thorne had grabbed her. Her expression went hard. She said something sharp in Korean that made Min-jun wince and Ji-Hoon nod grimly. "Come, child." Her English was heavily accented but firm. "Let's get you cleaned up. These men have blood work to plan." Maya let herself be guided up a staircase, through hallways that smelled of green tea and something else, gun oil maybe, or the particular scent of controlled violence. The room Ajuma Kim led her to was larger than her entire apartment in Queens, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens that glowed under subtle lighting. Bathroom there, clothes in the closet, they'll fit. We keep sizes for situations like this. Ajuma Kim's voice gentled. You're safe here. No man enters this wing without permission, not even Ji-Hoon Kang. Who are you people? Maya asked, finally finding her voice. Ajuma Kim smiled, but it wasn't entirely kind. We're the family that handles problems the law can't touch. The people who make sure men like your boss learn there are consequences for thinking women are disposable. She moved toward the door, then paused. Ji-Hoon Kang has been watching you for 6 months, wanted to approach you properly, respectfully, kept telling Min-jun he needed to find the right moment. Her eyes were knowing. This wasn't the moment he wanted, but it's the one he got, and now that man will pay for forcing his hand. She closed the door softly, leaving Maya alone in a room that cost more than she'd earned in 5 years, in a house run by a crime family, under the protection of a man who'd just declared war on her behalf. Maya walked to the window, looked out at the gardens and the walls and the men patrolling in the shadows. Somewhere in Manhattan, Harrison Thorne was probably calling his lawyers, thinking his money and connections would save him. He had no idea that he'd just become the example that would teach every other predator in New York what happened when you touch something the Kang family decided to protect. Maya's hands had finally stopped shaking, not because she felt safe, safety was too simple a word for what this was, but because for the first time in 2 years, she felt like she had an army at her back instead of a target on it. Maya showered for 40 minutes, scrubbing until her skin was raw and the water ran cold. She dressed in clothes that fit perfectly, black silk pajamas that whispered against her skin, soft and expensive, and nothing like the Target sleepwear she owned. When she finally emerged, Ajuma Kim was waiting with tea and the kind of knowing silence that said she'd seen this before. Ji-Hoon Kang wants to speak with you when you're ready. No pressure. Tomorrow is fine if tonight is too much. But Maya was done with tomorrow, done with waiting, done with silence. I'm ready now. Ji-Hoon's office was on the first floor, down a hallway lined with what looked like original Korean artwork that probably cost more than her student loans. He was sitting behind a desk made of dark wood, his suit jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with scars and what looked like the edge of a tattoo. Min-jun stood by the window, and a third man, older, wearing glasses, looking more like a professor than a criminal, sat with a laptop open. Miss Sterling, Ji-Hoon stood immediately, that same careful gentleness in his expression. Please, sit. This is Lee Sang-ho, our family's attorney and investigator. He's been gathering information on Thorne. Maya sat in the leather chair across from Ji-Hoon's desk. The tea Ajuma Kim had given her was still warm in her hands, grounding her. What have you found? Sang-ho adjusted his glasses. 3 settlements in the past 5 years, all with non-disclosure agreements, all with women who worked directly under Director Thorne. The amounts range from $75,000 to $200,000. Rachel Morrison, Maya said quietly. She left 3 months ago. She warned me. Ji-Hoon's expression didn't change, but something in his stillness sharpened. Do you know where she is? LinkedIn shows she moved to Denver, works for a tech company now. Maya set down her tea. Her hands were steady. There was another woman before her, Jennifer Chen. She was there when I started. Brilliant analyst. She quit after 6 months, and I never knew why. And before that, I heard rumors about someone named Allison Greer, but she was gone before I arrived. Min-jun's jaw tightened. Sang-ho was already typing, his fingers flying across the keyboard. There are others, Maya continued, her voice gaining strength. Women who didn't file complaints, but who left suddenly. Women who stopped coming to office events after Thorne paid them special attention. I kept a list in my personal email. Names, dates, patterns. I thought if I documented enough, if I built a case, HR would have to listen. HR knew. Ji-Hoon's voice was still quiet, but something underneath it had turned to winter. The settlements were processed through Vanguard's legal department, which means the board knew, which means your HR director Patricia knew exactly what Thorne was when she told you to drop your complaint. Maya looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who'd been watching her for 6 months, who'd stepped into that office at the exact right moment, who was now sitting across from her with fury in his eyes that he was holding back only through sheer force of will.
"How many?" Ji-Hoon asked softly. "How many women do you think he's hurt?" "At least 8 that I know of, maybe more." Maya's voice was steady now, cold and clear. "And every single one of them was told to be quiet, told that speaking up would ruin their careers, told that men like Harrison Thorne were untouchable." Ji-Hoon stood slowly, walked to the window where Min-jun was standing, looked out at the gardens and the darkness beyond. When he spoke again, his voice had lost all inflection, all warmth. It was the voice of a man who just passed judgment and was now simply deciding on method of execution. "Sang-ho, I want the names of every woman, every settlement, every board member who signed off on those payments, every HR representative who buried complaints, every executive who knew and did nothing." He turned back to face Maya, and his eyes were black ice. "And I want them delivered to me by morning, along with their financial records, their communication logs, and every piece of leverage we can use to bury them so deep they'll never see daylight again." "Hyung?" Min-jun started. "This isn't just about Thorne anymore." Ji-Hoon's voice cut through the room like a blade. "This is about every person who built the system that told women like Miss Sterling that their silence was the price of survival. Every person who profited from that silence. Every person who looked the other way because it was convenient." He looked at Maya, and his expression softened just slightly. "You wanted him destroyed. I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to destroy everyone who made you think you had to endure this alone." Maya felt something crack open in her chest. Not fear, not relief. Something harder and sharper and infinitely more dangerous. "Good," she said. And Ji-Hoon Kang smiled like a wolf who'd just been given permission to hunt. The war began at 6:47 a.m. on a Friday morning, exactly 12 hours after Ji-Hoon had carried Maya out of Vanguard Group. It began not with violence, but with phone calls, emails, and financial transactions that moved through the global banking system like poison through veins. Maya watched it unfold from Ji-Hoon's office, where Sang-ho had set up 3 monitors displaying real-time information. She'd barely slept, but adrenaline and fury had burned through exhaustion, leaving her sharp and focused and hungry for blood that wouldn't stain her hands directly. "First target," Sang-ho announced, pulling up a file. "Michael Brennan, Vanguard's chief operating officer. He approved all 3 settlement payments and personally convinced the board to keep Thorne on staff after the second complaint." Ji-Hoon didn't look up from his phone. What does he value most? His reputation. He's being considered for a board position at Goldman Sachs. The appointment is contingent on a clean background check. Then let's make sure that background check finds something interesting. Ji-Hoon's fingers moved across his phone screen. "Send the sealed settlement documents to the Goldman board, anonymously. Include his signed approvals and the internal emails where he called the women liabilities to be managed." Maya watched Sang-ho's fingers fly across the keyboard, watched documents upload, watched an email marked confidential, board review, appear in someone's inbox 3,000 miles away. "Done," Sang-ho said. "He'll be withdrawn from consideration by Monday, probably asked to resign from Vanguard by Tuesday." "One down." "Next," Ji-Hoon said calmly, like he was ordering lunch instead of destroying lives. "Patricia Simmons, HR Director." Min-jun stepped forward with a tablet. "She's been embezzling from the Employee Wellness Fund for 3 years. Small amounts, 5 to 10,000 per quarter, enough to pay for her daughter's private school tuition. Evidence? Bank transfers, forged signatures, falsified expense reports, all documented and ready to send to the SEC and the IRS simultaneously." Ji-Hoon glanced at Maya. "Your call." Maya thought about Patricia's face when she'd filed her complaint, the way she'd looked at Maya like she was the problem, not Thorne, the way she'd threatened Maya's career for having the audacity to expect protection. "Send it," Maya said. Min-jun tapped the screen. "Done. The SEC will have it within the hour. Criminal charges should follow by end of business." 2 down. They worked through the list like surgeons performing a complex operation. Each target was analyzed, their vulnerabilities identified, their destruction executed with clinical precision. Robert Chen, board member who'd called Thorne's behavior boys being boys, his insider trading violations were sent to the FBI, complete with phone records and transaction receipts. David Holbrook, senior VP who'd taken Thorne to strip clubs and joked about the talent in the secretarial pool. His offshore tax shelters were exposed to the IRS with detailed documentation spanning 7 years. Stephen Martinez, another director who'd witnessed Thorne corner Jennifer Chen and had laughed about it in the executive lounge. His undisclosed conflict of interest with a vendor, which violated federal contracting laws, was delivered to the Department of Justice. One by one, Ji-Hoon dismantled the infrastructure that had protected Harrison Thorne, not with bullets or beatings, but with information, leverage, and the kind of systematic destruction that left no evidence of his involvement. By noon, 3 executives had received calls from federal investigators. By 2 p.m., 2 had been placed on administrative leave. By 4 p.m., Vanguard's stock had dropped 6% on rumors of a corporate governance crisis. And through it all, Ji-Hoon remained calm, methodical, terrifying in his efficiency. "Now Thorne," Maya said, watching another executive's life implode on the monitors. "What about Thorne himself?" Ji-Hoon finally looked up from his phone, and his smile was the most dangerous thing Maya had ever seen. "Thorne doesn't just lose his job, Miss Sterling. Thorne loses everything." He nodded to Song-ho, who pulled up a new file. His accounts, all 7 of them, including the offshore holdings he thinks are hidden, will be frozen by morning on suspicion of money laundering. His marriage, his wife will receive documented proof of his affairs with 3 different women, complete with hotel receipts and text messages. His reputation, every major financial publication will receive an anonymous tip about the ongoing investigation into systemic sexual harassment at Vanguard, with his name featured prominently. "And his uncle on the board?" Maya asked. "Already handled." Min-jun's voice was satisfied. "His uncle's company has a contract with Vanguard worth $40 million. That contract was contingent on several provisions that upon closer inspection, he's been violating for 2 years. The contract was terminated an hour ago. His company will likely file for bankruptcy by month's end." Maya felt something like awe wash over her. This wasn't just revenge. This was the complete and total erasure of a man's entire existence. "How long?" she asked quietly. "How long until he has nothing left?" Ji-Hoon checked his watch. 72 hours. By Monday morning, Harrison Thorne will be unemployed, under federal investigation, divorced, and completely financially ruined. He met her eyes. "And that's just the legal destruction. The rest comes after." The rest. Maya didn't ask what that meant, didn't need to. She could see it in the way Min-jun's hand rested near his phone, in the way Song-ho had a second set of files marked Phase 2, in the way Ji-Hoon looked at her like he was waiting for permission to cross a line that once crossed couldn't be uncrossed. "Do it," Maya said. "All of it." And Ji-Hoon Kang went back to his phone, back to the systematic dismantling of Harrison Thorne's world, while Maya watched and learned exactly what it meant to have a monster fight your battles. It was past midnight when Ji-Hoon finally closed his laptop and dismissed Song-ho and Min-jun with a quiet word in Korean. Maya had been sitting in the leather chair for hours, watching the war unfold, watching lives crumble with the click of a button. She should have been exhausted, should have been horrified, should have felt something other than this cold, satisfied fury. "You should rest," Ji-Hoon said, but he didn't move from behind his desk, and something in his voice suggested he didn't expect her to leave.
"Why me?" Maya asked instead. The question had been building in her chest since Ajuma Kim had mentioned the 6 months of watching. "You said you'd been observing me. Why?" Ji-Hoon was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face like he was deciding how much truth to give. Then he stood, walked to the bar cart near the window, and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He brought one to her, set it on the desk within reach, then leaned against the edge of his desk, close enough to talk quietly, but far enough to not crowd her. "Do you know what it's like," he began slowly, "to be surrounded by people who only see what you can do for them, who smile and bow and say exactly what they think you want to hear, but there's nothing real behind their eyes?" Maya thought about the Vanguard executives, the forced laughter at Thorne's jokes, the careful compliments that meant nothing, the endless performance of corporate ambition. Yes, she said, I know exactly what that's like. I came to New York 8 months ago to oversee my family's expansion into legitimate business, to learn how to operate in your world of quarterly reports and board meetings and shareholders. Ji-Hoon's expression was distant, like he was looking at something she couldn't see. And every person I met was the same. They wanted access to my money, my connections, my power. They studied me like I was a puzzle to solve, a door to unlock. They were all performing. He took a sip of his whiskey. Except you. Maya felt something shift in her chest. I didn't even know who you were. I know. His smile was soft, almost sad. The first time I saw you was in a morning meeting. You were sitting in the back, taking notes for Thorne. Some executive made a joke, something racist disguised as humor. Everyone laughed because he was important. But you? Ji-Hoon's eyes focused on her with sudden intensity. You looked up from your notes, and your face went completely blank. Not angry, not hurt, just removed, like you'd gone somewhere else in your head to survive the moment. Maya remembered that meeting, remembered the joke about diversity hires and quotas, remembered forcing her expression into neutrality while her hands had tightened around her pen. I recognize that look, Ji-Hoon continued quietly, because I've worn it myself, in Seoul, in my father's house, in rooms full of men who thought they owned me because I was born into their world. That look that says, I see exactly what you are, but I'm going to survive you anyway. He set down his glass. After that, I started paying attention. Watched you solve problems nobody thanked you for, watched you absorb Thorne's condescension with perfect professionalism, watched you make yourself small and invisible and essential all at once. And I thought, his voice dropped lower, I thought, here is someone real, someone who hasn't let this world make them hollow. Maya's throat was tight. You don't know me. I know you kept a documentation file on Thorne's harassment. I know you warned other women in the office even though it put you at risk. I know you filed an HR complaint knowing it would probably destroy your career. Ji-Hoon's gaze was unwavering. I know you stayed in that building, kept working for that man because you had student loans and medical bills for your mother and you couldn't afford to be brave. I know survival, Maya, and I know strength when I see it. So what was I to you? Maya asked, and she couldn't keep the edge out of her voice. Some kind of project? Someone to save so you could feel like a hero? No. Ji-Hoon's answer was immediate, almost harsh. You were the first person in 8 months who reminded me what it felt like to see someone and actually want to know them. Not use them, not own them, know them. He ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. I was trying to figure out how to approach you without terrifying you, how to tell you that I saw you without sounding like every other powerful man who thinks noticing a woman means he's entitled to her attention. Maya laughed, but it was bitter. Well, you definitely didn't manage the not terrifying part. No, Ji-Hoon agreed quietly, but I managed the part where you're safe, where the man who hurt you will never hurt anyone again, where you don't have to make yourself small to survive. He looked at her with something raw in his expression. I know you didn't ask for this, for me, for any of it, but I'm asking now, when this is over, when Thorne is destroyed and you're free to go anywhere, do whatever you want. He paused. Would you consider staying, not as someone I saved, as someone who belongs here? Maya picked up the whiskey glass, took a sip, let the burn ground her. Ask me again when I'm not covered in bruises and making decisions out of trauma. Ji-Hoon nodded slowly, respect and something like relief in his eyes. Fair enough, he said, and in the silence that followed, Maya understood that she'd just been offered something far more dangerous than revenge. She'd been offered a place in his world, a throne beside his, a partnership built on violence and power and the strange, terrifying recognition of seeing yourself in someone else's eyes. She should have said no immediately. She didn't. 71 hours after Ji-Hoon had begun dismantling his world, Harrison Thorne did exactly what desperate, cornered predators always do. He showed up at the Kang estate at 3 a.m., drunk and furious, and stupid enough to think he still had leverage. The security alert woke Maya from restless sleep. She pulled on a robe and found Ji-Hoon already in the hallway, dressed in black tactical gear that made him look less like a CEO and more like what he actually was, a man bred for violence. "Stay upstairs," he said, his voice calm, but his eyes hard. Maya ignored him and followed him down. They found Thorne in the entrance hall, held between two of Min Jun's men. His expensive suit was wrinkled and stained, his face blotched with alcohol and rage. He had lost weight in the past 3 days, his eyes sunken and wild. The polished director was gone. What remained was the entitled, vicious thing that had always lurked underneath. "You," he spat when he saw Ji-Hoon. "You fucking think you can destroy me? Do you know who I am? My family built Vanguard. My uncle..." "Your uncle declared bankruptcy yesterday. His company collapsed when we pulled his contracts. He's currently being investigated for fraud. Would you like to try another threat?" Thorne's face went purple. Then his eyes landed on Maya, and something ugly twisted his features. "This is all because of her? Because some uppity assistant couldn't take a compliment? I made you, you ungrateful bitch. I gave you opportunities. I could have had you fired 100 times, but I kept you around, and this is how you repay me?" Maya descended the stairs slowly, her bare feet silent on the marble. She was wearing silk pajamas that cost more than her monthly rent used to, in a house owned by a crime family, about to confront the man who'd tried to rape her. She should have been afraid. She felt nothing but cold, clean fury. "You didn't make me," she said quietly. "I made you look competent. Every presentation you delivered, I built. Every deal you closed, I researched. Every client you impressed, I prepared your talking points." She stopped 5 feet from him, close enough to see the broken capillaries in his eyes. "You were mediocre, Harrison. The only thing you were good at was taking credit for other people's work and making women feel small enough to accept it. You're nothing without me." "No," Maya's voice cut through his. "You're nothing without the system that protected you, without the board members who covered for you, without the HR directors who buried complaints, without the culture that taught women like me that survival meant silence." She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd learned violence from experts. But that system, Ji-Hoon dismantled it piece by piece. And you're just a pathetic drunk who thought his last name made him untouchable. Thorne's face crumpled. "I'll go to the police. I'll tell them everything. About Kang, about his family, about what?" Maya pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward him. "About how you attempted to sexually assault me in your office? Because I have the security footage." Ji-Hoon made sure the cameras were running. She swiped to the next image. "Or maybe you want to talk about Jennifer Chen, Rachel Morrison, Allison Greer, because they're all willing to testify now that they know they're not alone." She swiped again. "Or perhaps you'd like to discuss the money laundering the FBI found in your accounts, the offshore holdings you failed to declare, the tax evasion going back 7 years? Another swipe. All of it documented, all of it admissible, all of it waiting for you in a federal courtroom." Thorne stared at the phone like it was a snake. "You can't. This isn't legal." Ji-Hoon stepped forward, his voice dropping to something deadly. "Miss Sterling just delivered the legal destruction. What comes next is personal." He nodded to Min Jun, who appeared from the shadows holding something that gleamed dully in the low light. Not a gun, something worse, a length of pipe wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound of breaking bones. Maya should have looked away, should have walked back upstairs and let the men handle what came next. Instead, she met Thorne's terrified eyes and felt absolutely nothing. "You wanted to know your place," she said softly, echoing the words he'd whispered to her 3 days ago. "Here it is, broken, ruined, forgotten." She turned to Ji-Hoon. "He's yours." Ji-Hoon's hand touched her shoulder, gentle despite the violence about to unfold. "Go upstairs, Maya. You don't need to see this." This time she listened, not because she was afraid of what Ji-Hoon would do to Thorne, but because she'd already taken what she needed. The look in Thorne's eyes when he realized he'd lost everything, that the woman he'd tried to break was the architect of his destruction. She climbed the stairs, and behind her, she heard Thorne start to scream. By the time she reached her room, the screaming had stopped. She poured herself a glass of water, looked out at the gardens where the first light of dawn was breaking, and felt something settle in her chest. Not peace. Peace was too soft a word for what this was, but justice, cold and brutal and absolute, the kind that only came when you stopped asking permission and started taking what you were owed. Maya Sterling had been silent for 26 years. She was done being quiet. Maya returned to Vanguard Group exactly 1 week after Harrison Thorne had tried to destroy her. She walked through the marble lobby at 8 a.m. wearing a churchill Tom Ford suit that Ji-Hoon had personally selected, her natural hair styled in an elegant crown of curls instead of the submissive bun she'd worn for 2 years, and her wire-rimmed glasses replaced with contacts that let the world see her eyes clearly for the first time. The security guard who'd watched her come and go invisibly for 24 months did a double take. "Miss Sterling?" "Director Sterling," she corrected smoothly, and walked past him to the executive elevators. The announcement had gone out at 7 a.m. via company-wide email from the interim CEO, a man Ji-Hoon's family had installed after the previous leadership had collapsed like a house of cards. 3 board members had resigned. 4 executives were under federal investigation. Patricia Simmons was awaiting trial for embezzlement, and Harrison Thorne was simply gone, his name scrubbed from the company directory, his office already cleared out and repurposed. The official story was that he'd accepted a position overseas and had left immediately for personal reasons. Anyone who'd worked at Vanguard for more than 6 months knew what that really meant. Maya stepped off the elevator on the 42nd floor, the executive level she'd spent 2 years serving, and felt every eye in the office track her movement. Whispers followed her like a wake. The assistants who'd ignored her now watched with poorly concealed shock. The analysts who'd dismissed her looked confused. The executives who remained looked terrified. Good. Her office was Harrison Thorne's old corner suite. Shang-ho and Min-jun had overseen its complete renovation over the weekend. Gone were the mahogany desk and leather furniture that reeked of old money and older power. In their place, a minimalist workspace with clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, and technology that would make a CIA analyst jealous. On her desk sat a single file. She opened it to find organizational charts, personnel files, and a handwritten note from Ji-Hoon. Burn it all down and build it better. Her first meeting was at 9 a.m. with the remaining department heads. They filed into the conference room with the same forced smiles and careful deference they'd once given to Thorne, but underneath, she could see the fear. They knew who backed her, knew what happened to the last regime, knew that the quiet assistant they'd ignored now held their careers in her hands. Maya let them sit in uncomfortable silence for 30 seconds before she spoke. "Let's be clear about what's happening here," she began, her voice calm and absolutely uncompromising. Vanguard Group has operated for 20 years as a haven for mediocre men who confused entitlement with excellence. That ends today. She pulled up a presentation, one she'd built herself, no assistant required. "I've spent the last week reviewing every department, every contract, every personnel file. What I found was a company running on inertia and institutional rot. 60% of our analysts are underutilized because their ideas are filtered through managers who take credit for their work. Our female employees have a turnover rate 3 times higher than industry average because of cultural factors nobody wanted to address. And our profit margins have been declining for 4 years because nobody had the courage to innovate." She clicked to the next slide. "So here's what's going to change. First, we're implementing blind performance reviews. Your work will be evaluated on merit, not on who plays golf with whom. Second, we're restructuring compensation. Pay will be tied to actual contribution, not tenure or nepotism. Third, we're creating an independent HR oversight committee with external auditors. If you have a complaint, it will be investigated by people who don't owe their jobs to the accused." One of the VPs, a man in his 50s who'd been at Vanguard before Maya was born, cleared his throat. "Director Sterling, with all due respect, these changes are quite radical. Perhaps we should take a more measured approach." "Measured approach?" Maya's smile was sharp enough to cut. The measured approach protected sexual predators and buried talent for 2 decades. The measured approach nearly destroyed this company's reputation. The measured approach ends now. She leaned forward. If you can't adapt, there's the door. I have a list of 43 analysts, most of them women, most of them people of color, who are more than qualified to take your position. The VP's face went red, but he nodded and shut his mouth. Good. Maya advanced the presentation. Now, let's talk about the clients we're going to lose and the ones we're going to gain, because under my leadership, Vanguard will no longer be the old boys club that coasts on legacy. We're going to be the smartest, most ruthless, most innovative firm in New York, and anyone who can't keep up will be left behind. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, half the room looked like they wanted to quit. The other half looked energized for the first time in years. Maya dismissed them and returned to her office to find Ji-Hoon waiting, leaning against her desk in a 3-piece suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. "How did it go?" he asked. 3 resignation emails already. Maya set down her tablet and allowed herself a small smile. Good. I didn't want them anyway. Ji-Hoon's expression was warm, proud, and something deeper she wasn't quite ready to name. You're terrifying when you're in your element. I learned from the best. She crossed to the window, looked out at the city spread below them. Is this what power feels like? Knowing you can reshape everything with a single decision? Yes. Ji-Hoon came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Do you like it? Maya thought about the assistant who made herself invisible, about the woman who'd believed that working harder would protect her, about the girl who'd been taught that silence was survival. I love it, she said, and she meant it. 3 months after Maya Sterling became Director of Operations at Vanguard Group, the first snowfall of winter blanketed Manhattan in white silence. She stood in Ji-Hoon's penthouse overlooking Central Park, a glass of wine in her hand, watching the city transform into something clean and pristine and deceptively peaceful. Behind her, she heard Ji-Hoon end a call in rapid Korean, his voice carrying the particular edge that meant someone somewhere had just made a very costly mistake. She didn't turn around, didn't need to. She'd learned the rhythms of his world the same way he'd learned hers, through observation, proximity, and the strange intimacy that came from building an empire together. The Shanghai deal? She asked when the call ended. Resolved. Ji-Hoon came to stand beside her at the window, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. How's Vanguard? We closed the Morrison account today, 40 million in assets under management. She pulled up her phone, showed him the signed contract. They were impressed with our new leadership structure, said it was refreshing to work with a firm that valued merit over nepotism. Because you fired everyone who couldn't adapt. Because I fired everyone who couldn't adapt, Maya corrected. The ones who stayed are thriving. Profit margins are up 18%. Employee retention has doubled. And we just made Forbes' list of best places to work for women in finance. Ji-Hoon's expression was unreadable. Do you miss it, being invisible? The question caught her off guard. She considered it honestly, looking out at the snow-covered city where she'd once been just another expendable employee struggling to survive. No, she said finally. I miss the safety of it sometimes, the simplicity of knowing my place, staying small, avoiding attention. She turned to face him fully. But I don't miss the woman I had to become to survive that world. The one who made herself forgettable so men like Thorne wouldn't notice her long enough to hurt her. And now? Now I'm the one they're afraid of. Maya set down her wine glass. Now, when I walk into a room, conversations stop. When I make a decision, it's final. When I say someone's career's over, it ends. She held his gaze. I've become exactly what this city creates when it pushes the wrong woman too far. Ji-Hoon reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. When she didn't, his hand cupped her face with surprising gentleness. You've become what you always were underneath, someone who was too powerful for the cage they tried to keep you in. And you? Maya asked. What have you become? His thumb traced her cheekbone, his dark eyes holding something that made her breath catch. Someone who's forgotten how to want anything except what's standing in front of me. The admission hung between them, heavy with 3 months of carefully maintained distance, 3 months of late-night strategy sessions that never crossed the line, 3 months of proximity and tension, and the unspoken question of what they were building together. Maya had told him to ask again when she wasn't making decisions out of trauma, when she could choose him clearly, without the weight of rescue muddying the waters. That time was now. "I'm staying," she said quietly. "Not because you saved me, not because I owe you, but because when I imagine my future, the empire I want to build, the power I want to hold, the person I want standing beside me when the world tries to tear me down, it's you." Ji-Hoon's expression shifted into something raw and unguarded. "Maya, I'm not finished." She stepped closer, close enough to feel his heartbeat. "I'm staying because you saw me when I was invisible, because you gave me the weapons to fight my own battles, because you never once asked me to be smaller or softer or more grateful." Her hand found his. "Because you looked at me and saw an equal, not a possession, a partner, not a prize." "You are my equal," Ji-Hoon said, his voice rough. "You always were. I just had to wait for you to see it too." "I see it now," Maya smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd learned to wield power like a blade. "So here's what's going to happen. We're going to stand together and build something that terrifies every mediocre man who thinks the world belongs to them. We're going to make sure that no woman ever has to choose between her dignity and her survival, the way I did. And we're going to do it with such ruthless efficiency that our enemies won't know what hit them until it's too late." Ji-Hoon's answering smile was pure predator. "I wouldn't want it any other way." When he kissed her, it wasn't the desperate passion of rescue or the grateful relief of survival. It was the meeting of two people who'd chosen each other with clear eyes and darker intentions, who understood that what they were building together was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Outside, snow continued to fall on Manhattan. Inside, Maya Sterling, once invisible, once silent, once small, stood in the arms of a man who'd gone to war for her and realized something profound. She wasn't the damsel who'd been saved by the monster. She was the queen who'd claimed him as her weapon, and together they would reshape the world into something that answered only to them. The silent center had found her storm, and God help anyone who stood in their way.